So once you've figured out what kind of information you want, then you want to get it. And one of the things, especially in marketing, is many of the variables that we want to measure are what we call latent variables, which means that they're in your brain. I guess I've talked a lot of times in this class about perception is everything. Well, we're trying to measure perception. And because I can't get into your brain yet, we're coming pretty close to actually monitor what you're thinking, what you're feeling. Sometimes we have to use indirect methods to measure something. So, for example, a very common thing that we measure in marketing is satisfaction. And how would I know if you're satisfied with a product? No. Say again? I couldn't hear, but it was a good answer. Survey. Yeah, survey. Did you like the product? Yeah, and some people will say yes, some people will be polite, and most people won't fill out the survey. What else? So would that be a good indicator as to whether somebody is satisfied? Yeah, is there anything else that you could look at that would be an indicator of satisfaction? Yeah. See if they buy a repeat purchase, that's a great one. So if they bought it again, they probably liked it the first time. Anything else? Say again, number of returns, or the, complaints, whatever. I had a friend that I'd never heard of this before, but if you're trying to do quality assessment on a product they're trying to buy, you just type into Google frequent complaints about and leave it blank and let autofill tell you which products get the most complaints. And yeah, it's Comcast, never mind. I need to get serious here. So the point is, when you're dealing with these latent variables, a lot of times it's good to have more than one indicator. So rather than just looking at returns, just looking at the survey, if I combine returns plus a survey plus complaints, then I get a more nuanced picture. I'm more likely of correctly assessing that internal variable. And just as kind of a freebie to take away with you, if you're only allowed to use one question to measure satisfaction, the single most effective question is, would you recommend this to a friend? Because if somebody says they'll recommend it to a friend, you've got social risk involved, you've got personal reputation involved. There's a very, very high correlation between saying yes to that and being satisfied with the product. So then, got to collect the data. First issue is, do you need fresh data? Remember, just as we do with human beings as businesses, we always go for the easy information first. We always go for the internal search. In business, this is secondary information, which is information that already exists. The advantage to secondary data or information that already exists is that it already exists, which means that you can have it immediately. There's no time delay. And usually it's cheaper than doing your own research, because a lot of times it's available for free, or if I paid for a research project and somebody else wants the data, I might be willing to sell it to them at a very reasonable price just to get something back on that research. It's a sunk cost. The disadvantages is it's frequently out of date. It already exists, which means it was created sometime in the past. It may not directly answer your question, so you might have to, if I'm thinking about coming out with a new ice cream concept for teenagers, and there's a research that shows how ice cream is perceived in senior citizens' homes, that's information about how people perceive ice cream. Would that relate to teenagers? That's a good question, but that would be the kind of issue you'd have to take into account. If that's valid, if there's something that can be used, it's available now and it's cheap. If that's not valid, then I need to pay to get it fresh. And then you have no control over the methodology. So sample size, how the sampling was done, what kind of questions did they ask. You just have to assume that they did it, and hopefully in the research report, which you talked about, they disclosed enough information for you to be able to determine whether or not you can use that research or not. The other kind of data is fresh data, primary data, and this is just kind of the flip-flop. The advantage is you have complete control over the methodology, and the data that you get is going to directly relate to your research question. The downside is it's costly because you have to create it, and it takes time. And so you would only pay for original research if you can't get it done with secondary research. And then some of the issues in collecting data, one is whether or not to interact directly with the participants. The non-interactive approach questionnaire, very common. It's great for descriptive data collection when you already know what the questions are. You know, which color would you prefer, blue or red, if it's down to that. But if I want to know which colors do people look for, that probably isn't a good questionnaire type question. And the good news is it's fairly easy to collect. And these days you can do your research online with Qualtrics, SurveyChimp. There's lots of survey software out there. And there was lots of research done early on in the internet era showing that the results that you get from an online survey are comparable to the results that you would get from a paper and pencil survey, so you don't have any major issues around methodology. So if it's the results are consistent between paper and online, the cost of paper and the time it takes to do paper is such that you would be foolish not to do it online. Okay, and yeah, question? I'm just scratching. The other issue is, have you ever like taken a survey and they got the question wrong? You know, they ask the question, you can't answer this one because, you ever had that happen to you? No. Yes, you did, you're just not. I get this all the time when I do surveys. It's a scale of 1 to 10, how do you like this? And I always get somebody who writes in 7 3/4. It's not really 7, not really 8. You know, if I go scale of 1 to 1,000, they go, well, 992.3. It's not really. There's always people that just want to have it be their way, and in descriptive data, there's no room for that. There's no room for that kind of nuance. Interactive data, on the other hand, you do interact with people, which allows you to clarify, to make sure that you're getting the answers. If you want to go off on a tangent, you can go off on a tangent to see if that's appropriate. The disadvantage is it's expensive. So again, it's done for exploratory research. I'm trying to think of when it would be done for descriptive. I can't think of a situation where I want to use this technique for descriptive research, just given the cost. Another way, which is neither personal or impersonal, is just observation. The beauty of observational data is that actions speak louder than words. If some, you know, I have this. There's many products that have somewhat of a social stigma to them. For example, who here likes to go to McDonald's? Okay, we've got a few brave souls willing to admit, but most people will say, you know, I don't go to McDonald's, that's not healthy. But they sell billions and billions of burgers, so somebody's going to McDonald's. And so for me to ask you if you think McDonald's is a good restaurant, you would say yes or no. But if I have a camera that watches you going into the door at McDonald's and walking out with a bag with some grease showing through the bottom of the bag, then I know that you are going to McDonald's, whether or not you would admit it. So the actions speak louder than words. The difficulties is that sometimes it's hard to interpret observational data. So if I'm following...
You just like manipulate your question, like, do you often buy McDonald's for a friend?
Okay, so the comment was, if I wanted to get around that because it's a sensitive issue, I would never ask if you eat McDonald's. I would say, do you know people who eat McDonald's? Or in general, do people think McDonald's is a good place to eat? The way to ask, but again, rather than asking that question, I can just watch and see who goes into McDonald's. But again, I can't get into your head. I can't know what you're thinking with observational data. You might have just been going in there to ask directions because your phone broke and you can't get GPS anymore. And many times the data is difficult to interpret. So if I've got video data, I've been watching people as they interact with a product, or I've been following people through a store. So how do you interpret, do you count the head shakes? Do you, and there's all kinds of fun behavioral measures that we can use. Yeah, the other side of that, and this is really one of the areas where big data is playing a big role, is with some of the scanner type data, the single point, where you scan your card and I know everything that you bought on that day plus everything that you've ever bought. I know the time of day you bought it. I know what you paid for it. I know what else you bought with it. I know if you returned it later. I know how you paid for it. And then when I combine that with your phone, I know where you are, when you were. I know who you talked to. I know why you talked to them. That's all observational data that can be used to do a better job of understanding consumers.